Live from New York City, it's the Gary Null Show. And now, your host, Gary Null.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Null. Always a pleasure to be able to share positive information. We're non-political, and the information I share on health and nutrition all comes from the National Library of Medicine, published in peer-reviewed journals, done at respected institutions. Now, why do I say that? For a simple reason. My regular audience knows all this, but we have a lot of new people viewing this, and also up on Gary Null YouTube, on Odysee. And so as a result, they're saying, well, who is this guy? How do I know I can trust this information? And this comes from a long time ago. And I'm going to get into our health in just a moment. I just want to do this as a preamble. In one of my very first debates, it was back in the early 1970s, 71, the issue was not the information. Were pesticides harmful, DDT specifically? I was one of the people, we had a small number of people out there trying to get DDT out, and DDT was a major pesticide. In fact, as a child, I can remember on two instances where trucks went up and down the street spraying this DDT, and it came out like a fog, and everyone was covered in it. Your houses, nobody thought anything of it. It was supposed to protect us. And then at the swimming pool, a guy would come with something that looked like a leaf blower and covered all of us in the pool with DDT. Well, there was one person who said this was wrong and dangerous. She was right. The entire scientific establishment that said DDT was safe, including the FDA, they were wrong. Her name was Rachel Carson. Now, I never met Rachel Carson, but she was a marine biologist, and she found that it was extremely dangerous, and it would last a long time in the soil, and it could cause cancer, and it would adversely affect our DNA. So I began to do as much research as I could, and I began to use my radio forum to get volunteers, and we would go to different places and hand out literature on get the government to say no to DDT. We went down to Washington, D.C. In fact, at one point, and there was no problem with security back then, so we would hand every single legislator a little pack that I'd written up using her material and other material about let's ban DDT. There weren't many of us. We didn't have any marches. There weren't enough. Sometimes it'd be 5 or 6 of us. But over a period of time, the message got out. And over a period of time, Ralph Nader, who really is the single most important person in American history when it comes to creating legislation and never being elected to an office. So he was a non-legislator who had more positive influence on getting laws passed, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and all these other, the Seatbelt Act. And so he protected us. And so he got behind this. We banned DDT in 1972. But before it was banned, I was doing a lot of debates on radio and television. And I had no academic background. I graduated from business college, yes. I was a registered dietitian, yes, but I had no clinical nutrition. I was not a scientist. And so the issue was never, is the information right? It's who's presenting it. And always, I mean, in every single situation, well, here is Dr. such and such, and this doctor's a medical, you're not a medical doctor, are you, Gary? No. Well, then let us listen to the doctor because they are more educated. Educated on what? They have no training, no classes in environmental toxicology. And so I wonder how many people didn't come down on the side of what we were saying because of our lack of credentials, my lack of credentials. I was the #1 person for almost 20 years debating on all health issues. I did over 400 debates on network television, radio, news. So then I went back to get my background. And one of the show hosts, Bill Boggs, who's still around, wonderful guy, had a great show on Channel 5 in New York for decades. He said to me, he said, Gary, and then one day when I was just finishing a debate on Channel 5 with Bill Boggs, a well-known and highly respected broadcast journalist in New York. After the show, he said, "Gary, you won the debate on information and facts. They won the debate on credentials." And in America, we seem to have this fetish about always respecting the most credentialed person. He said, "So from now on, when you're making an argument, I suggest that you get the best literature you can and hand it to them and say, this comes from the National Library of Medicine. This is a peer-reviewed journal." So I have them to thank for that, because that's what I did. In fact, in my very next debate, I took 5,000, I repeat, 5,000 scientific abstracts on the healing power of ginseng to a debate. And the good doctor came out saying, "Well, there's no scientific evidence that ginseng's any good." And they came to me and I said, "Well, sir, I'm merely the bearer of the information. Here are 5,000 peer-reviewed studies from around the world showing that ginseng does," and then I went through all this stuff. And then you could suddenly see he was stuck. He didn't have his facts. He was just this kind of arrogant, boisterous individual saying, "I'm a doctor, I know best." Well, no, you don't. And so that's why every single, no exception, piece of information I share on my program comes from the National Library of Medicine peer-reviewed literature. I'll give you an example. The National Institutes of Cardiology, and this is for all of Mexico, found that the higher the magnesium, that's an important mineral, the healthier our arteries. So why is this important? Because we right now are a nation that is, unfortunately, sadly, is very sick. We have never been this sick. I'm not talking about COVID, though that's partly responsible. Before COVID, back in 2019, we were the most overweight nation in the world in adults and children per population. That's not something you want to be proud of. And so outside of athletes in school, high school, and college, most Americans stop exercising. They don't eat healthy diets. But then we started with the woke generation, and they said it's good to be fat, be happy, and be fat, be overweight. And nobody should shame them. I agree. Nobody should ever shame someone because of something in the way of, well, what is actually a precursor to a major disease? And that is being overweight. Remember this, your heart does not grow in proportion to your weight, but it does have to pump blood, more blood, through the arteries and veins. Now, if you're overweight, the probability is you've had a diet that is not a healthy diet. I've never seen anyone in my practice that became morbidly obese eating sprout salads. So as a result, we're eating refined carbohydrates, trans fats, saturated fats, all of these things that cause us to become overweight, but also they damage our arteries. Therefore, a person could lose weight and feel okay, and let's hope they do lose weight. But what about the damage that was done to their arteries and veins when they were overweight? If those are not fixed, then you're going to end up like a friend of mine, a friend for 26 years. He's a professional friend. He is very good in what he does. And I use his services on a regular basis. And you become friendly with people. And he was always smoking, and he always had a pot belly. And of course, I'm not going to mention anything about this because it's none of my business. I have no right to transgress that line. I believe in freedom of choice. I just hope you make the right choice. Well, clearly, he thought he was making the right choice until last week when he called me and said he needed some help. And I said, why? He said, well, he's just about to go into surgery. They're going to give him a triple bypass operation. That's all they can do at this moment. He needs more. And because his carotid artery, that's the artery that goes up to the brain, feeds the brain, that's almost 100% clogged. And that's meaning that he is very sick and could die. So he said, after I get out of the surgery, could you help me get my health back? And of course, I'll help you. And can we help people clear their arteries? Yes. What's the proof? probably the finest, most courageous cardiologist in American history, Dr. Dean Ornish. Look him up. Here's what you'll see. He did the first studies, the first and second study, showing that with no medical intervention, just lifestyle and behavior modification, exercising, de-stressing, healthy plant-based diet, that you could reverse conditions that otherwise lead to putting in stents, coronary bypass operation. Even in a new film that I've done, it is shown that he took 9 individuals who required a complete heart transplant, taking the old heart out. There was no way of fixing it, putting a new heart in. And he was able to keep all 9 of those people from having to have that heart transplant. I filmed them. So that should have made headline news. He should have gotten the Nobel Prize in Medicine. But he did this also 40 years ago. He and I appeared on PBS National to debate the issue with other doctors who couldn't believe this. But it was true. He published in the 2 of the most respected journals in the world, The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. So you would have thought, okay, here's how we play it. If anywhere in science and medicine you can have a study that can be reproducible, meaning someone else, not you, take your protocol, follow it exactly, and come up with the same results you did, that's considered the finest type of medicine there is in science. Therefore, it becomes what is now used. So that meant that all of cardiology should have shifted to encouraging a plant-based diet, exercise, stress management, and then I would have suggested nutrient therapy, such as calcium and magnesium, and coenzyme Q10, cayenne, and L-carnitine, and other nutrients like potassium that are known to strengthen the heart, regulate its beat, and have it be stronger. Nothing was done. 0. Crickets, as if it never happened, but it did. And he had a best-selling book. He traveled the country. I had him on my radio show many times. So the whole idea is if we do it better, something safer, something that actually reverses the underlying cause of a disease, that's what we're going to do. Absolutely, positively, 100% just the opposite. This concerns me, and it should concern you, that we have natural and non-toxic methods of preventing disease and helping people mitigate their disease, but we're not using them. Why? Well, you know why. I don't have to tell you, and I know why. And it's been shown by even Dr. Angel, the former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, who was there, I believe, for 20 years. She's now, I believe, a professor at Harvard, and she said it. All right? So let's do all we can to use the most natural way of approaching health. Let's go back to the National Institutes of Cardiology. They found magnesium was important. Yes, magnesium regulates your heartbeat. Therefore, one of the best things you can do if you have stress. Why? Because stress changes the electrical charge to the heart. It has to, because if you go to run, your heart has to pick up its pace. If you're stressed or anxious or fearful, the heart picks up its pace. If you're creating cortisol, a stress hormone, the heart picks up its pace. But it has to come right back down to a normal pace. And if it doesn't, then you can have AFib. You can have a irregular heartbeat, and that can kill you. That can lead to strokes and a heart attack. But we also know that there are natural approaches to that as well. We're looking at alternatives that work and have proof. But what we don't ever talk about, ever, is, okay, you were overweight. You had damage. All right? You cannot be overweight and be healthy. It is not physically possible. So you lose the weight, great. But did you repair the damage? No one told me. What do you mean repair the damage, Gary? I mean, did they tell you how to go in there and clean up the arteries? And over time, through diet, exercise, and supplementation, you get a healthy endothelium, the inner lining of the arteries. Let me put it really simple. Let's just say that you have a water hose. All right, it's pliable. You roll it up and use it, but you leave it out in the sun all summer and you don't use it. Come the fall, you pick it up, it's all cracked. It's stiff. Same thing with your arteries. So you have to keep them healthy, pliable. You have to keep them so blood can flow through without being interfered with and creating a tightening of the arteries. That creates increased blood pressure. That can also lead to a heart attack and stroke. So I just give you this to understand that please go through this. Now I'm going to do a classroom on the air, which, by the way, every morning I do them in the morning. I film them. And then you can go to Gary Null YouTube and download them. You can go to Rumble and look under Gary Null Film Library. And you can go to Odysee and you can watch them. I don't play my classroom on the air on my regular noon show. I do these health nutrition on my regular noon show. So it's just a lot of additional information. Again, it's never controversial. It's not political. It's stuff that really helps us with the issues of our life. So back to this study. So I've told you about why detoxify, because that's how you repair the damage from being overweight to every organ in the body, your kidneys, your heart, your lung, your brain, and of course, the endothelial tissue in the veins and arteries. So now we have this study. It's about magnesium. What's it show? Listen carefully. The higher the level of magnesium within your normal range, it can reduce the risk of hypertension by almost 50%. And the risk of coronary artery calcification, what I was just talking about, the stiffness, by 42%. More than 70% of our population have an unhealthy balance of calcium to magnesium in our main trains of cells. A previous study in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition indicated that for every 50 milligrams per day increase in the intake of magnesium, the risk of cancer was reduced by 7%. Okay, 7% reduction in cancer risk with just 50 milligrams increase? Okay, the normal person gets somewhere around 300, maybe 400 milligrams magnesium each day in their diet. I believe it should be double that, 800. So if we go from 400 to 800, based upon 7% increasing with 50 milligrams, then I should be substantially reduced in my risk of cancer. Now, another notable study with more than 4,600 Americans found the risk of developing metabolic syndrome over the next 15 years was 31% lower for those with the highest intake of magnesium. And data from 1,276 Mexican subjects also indicated that for every, it's a little complicated, it's 0.17 milligrams per deciliter increase in serum magnesium levels was associated with a 16% reduction in coronary artery disease. The new cross-sectional study, which was published in the Nutrition Journal, major journal, assessed magnesium levels in about 1,300 Mexican participants, and none of the participants had any symptoms of cardiovascular disease. And the results indicated that people with the highest average serum level of magnesium had 48% lower odds of high blood pressure or hypertension, and 69% lower odds of type 2 diabetes, and 42% lower odds of coronary artery calcification compared with people with the lowest average. Okay? So this is really an important study. And this, if you applied this starting today, you could absolutely reduce your chance of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. And also, you're enhancing the body's ability to reduce inflammation in the endothelial cells. Good. Now, from Tabriz University of Medical Science comes a study about what they call the black seed. Well, it's normally the black cumin seed or cumin seed oil. And what they found, it's a very bitter tasting, but extraordinarily healing oil. It exceeds the capacity of any other oil that we know of, more than olive oil, more than flaxseed, hemp seed. It is the superstar. Black cumin seed oil, I always keep in my refrigerator. It lasts a long time. And you don't need much. So if I feel myself out of balance in some way, if I'm going on an airplane where there's a lot of people, or I'm coming off an airplane, I always take 1 teaspoon of black cumin seed oil and about 16 ounces of a juice. I always take it, don't just take it straight down. It's a little too harsh. Take it in a smoothie, but it helps treat, in this study, hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's disease. That's according to a randomized clinical trial. And this is an ancient healing food. It's known as Nigella, Nigella, sativa, Sativa. And it once was known as the remedy for everything but death. And indeed, it may prove the ideal treatment for the autoimmune thyroid condition known as Hashimoto's disease, which is the most common form of hypothyroidism. And this was published in the British Medical Journal, Complementary and Alternative Medicine. So if you have an underactive thyroid, you have hypothyroidism, which millions of Americans do, and especially women post-menopause, you might want to consider this. And also, aside from having these things, just even if you don't always use them, when you know you need them, you've got them there. That's important. And finally, twice a week, have a yoga class, plus do it at home, and it's effective in reducing depression. Boston University School of Medicine, people who suffer from depression should participate in yoga and deep breathing classes at least twice weekly, plus practice at home to receive a significant reduction in depression. And this was published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. We knew that meditation is great for you, for de-stressing you, for bringing your cortisol levels down, for allowing you to deal with stress without becoming stressed. And that's the art. You know, we had a school teacher, and everyone loved the school teacher. She was so patient with people. And she was in a class where we had some rowdy students. And I remember one of the other teachers, and I was there, and the class was over, and the other teacher says, "How can you not be stressed by all the stress that comes out of this class?" The teacher says, "I don't take it personally. They're creating the stress. I'm not absorbing it." That stuck in my mind. And that was a long time ago. That was in high school. So just remember, be the person who stays non-toxic in a toxic environment, happy in a sad environment, positive in a negative environment, optimistic in a fatalistic environment. Because everything is perception. Let's face it. We cannot always change the circumstances in our life, can we? No. But we can change how we're going to be affected by the circumstances in our life. That we can do. I get acupuncture preventatively. You know, nothing's wrong with me. I'm in ideal health. I get my blood work up done, cardiovascular done, pulse done. And my doctor is a medical doctor from China. He was born in China, raised in China, became a medical doctor, then was a professor, then moved to the United States and went to the University of Pennsylvania, where he was for the last 30 years, and then kind of semi-retired down here. But everyone goes to him. He's a very gentle person, very smart, and he'll sit and take your pulse, but he's reading 7 pulses, not just one. And he takes my pulse before and after, and my blood pressure before and after. He says, you know, there was a time when my pulse was not good, Gary. I said, when was that? He said, when I was in the internment camps in China under Mao Zedong. My family was in there. We were in there for a long time. We were forced on re-education farms where you barely got anything to eat, and they worked you all day, 7 days a week. And for 7 years, we were in there. And he said, my father saw how many of the people in there died and suffered. And he said, thank goodness my father was also a meditator. And he said, so our family would meditate in the most stressful times of the day. And it's that meditation of saying, even though I'm in a bad environment, I'm not going to feel bad. And so as a result, we survived. And he said, Gary, I survived without anger, because a lot of people come out of a place like that and boy, they're bitter, they're angry. And then they start to be argumentative about everything because of what they suffered. Understandable so. He said, we did it differently. So think about that. Think about someone who is deprived of their freedom only because someone decided to say, my neighbor reads books from, Western authors instead of the books that you're telling us, Mao's little red book. And yet today, he has used all those skills in helping other people. And by the way, acupuncture helps to de-stress, brings you to a sense of calmness, one of the best things you can do for depression. Just suggesting. Chiropractic is also good to do preventatively, like once a month. And eating well is also prevention. Yeah, it's simple things, not complicated. I'll do one last one here, and that's from the University College London. They found that the social media and the self-perpetuating cycle of risk for your body image and eating disorders is getting worse, not better. With recent reports finding that 91% of the United States adolescents use social media, that over 50% check their accounts at least once per hour, researchers decided to have a look into the influence of so much social media use on body image concerns in eating pathology in young adults, like, let's say anorexia, bulimia. And what they found at the Institute of Global Health, University College, after compiling all this information from 50 different studies in 17 countries, so it's not just isolated, all over the world, and people from 10 to 24 years of age, they centered around the comparisons of social media exposure to physical and mental health outcomes. And eating disorders can often be fatal. I know I've worked with people with anorexia. With such an overwhelming percentage of modern children using and interacting with social media, the risk could be generational and have consequences if ignored. So understanding factors contributing to pathology allows researchers and parents in particular, and educators and policymakers and healthcare professionals to use resources proactively and preventatively. The report suggests that social media usage leads to body image concerns and eating disorders and disordered eating and poor mental health. And specific time and frequency exposure to social media, the more you watch it, the worse it gets. And just one of the latest ones, and I've mentioned this before, is two things. First, there's this idea that celebrating someone who's morbidly obese on social media, which they're doing, and then everyone says how great you are. And that is not what you should be saying to someone who's morbidly obese, because that person will die, absolutely positively, long before they should. And no matter what you say from out exteriorly, those may be momentarily feel-good moments, but someone who is eating themselves to death, or the consequence of eating and overeating and not exercising, will be death. But in the process, you're not going to go directly from overeating to death. You're going to go through high blood pressure, diabetes, depression, angst, and anxiety disorders, improper sleeping. You're going to go through irregular heartbeats and pain. You're going to go through diabetic pain, neuropathies. And you can also lose through gangrene and poor circulation to the extremities. You can lose toes and feet, which diabetics do in huge amounts. So when you look at the truth of what's going on in a person's body, if you could open up the skin, and if you could just see every single thing that's happening when a person is eating wrong, and the heart struggling to beat and having enormous pressure on it to get the blood, then you wouldn't be celebrating that person's obesity. You'd be there with empathy and positive suggestions, if they chose to use them, and a support system to help them gain their health back. And in the process, help them lose the weight and regain their self-esteem, regain their sense of self-love. Because anyone who says, we love you for being obese, there's a difference between loving them for being obese and loving them in spite of them being obese. And we seem to have forgotten that young people just don't seem to have the intellect to understand this. So don't celebrate someone's dying in front of you. And that's what we're doing. And social media increased this. Hello. That's sorry. And unfortunately, look at the largest number of people. They're looking at the Kardashians and looking at her body and her $1 billion and her largest private jet out there at the airport and thinking, wow, look at her body. No, look at my body. No, don't compare yourself. Get your body weight, get your body mass index down, get your muscles strong. And you're not that other person, and they're not you, and you're not in their life. You don't know what they really go through. I've counseled over 3,000 very famous celebrities and the tens of thousands of people I've counseled. And guess what? The most famous people, models that you're all familiar with, people who won Academy Awards that you know by heart, people you think, and including athletes and famous singers, oh, do they have it all? They may have all that money can buy, but they don't have happiness, which you can't buy. So don't assume that that body they have and the style of their clothes and how they have their hair and makeup is something that you should emulate. It isn't. That's it for health and nutrition today, a little longer, but I think it's important that we learn more than just information. We learn the context and the human dynamic that it has to fit into. Remember, you can always go to GaryNull.com because all the articles I'm writing, I wrote 2 articles over the weekend. I post them on important topics. Newest documentaries are there. Back in a moment with some really interesting material.
Are you tired of closed-minded programming? Well, look no further than PRN.Live, the home for progressive voices.